Welcome to Washington Today for Monday, October 21st, 2024. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks for joining us today. Only 15 more days until Election Day, and the tops of both tickets are crisscrossing battlegrounds, looking to both lock up leads and find more votes. Former President Trump was in Asheville, North Carolina today, touring areas damaged by Hurricane Helene. Vice President Harris returned to Pennsylvania and Michigan. We'll hear from both of them coming up. The White House has announced a plan that would require insurance companies to cover the over-the-counter costs of birth control. The proposal expands an Affordable Care Act rule that already requires them to fully cover preventative care. Under the rule, several methods would be covered, including daily pills and emergency contraceptives. Also, White House National Security spokesman John Kirby said the Biden administration is, quote, deeply concerned about the release of classified documents detailing a possible Israeli attack on Iran. He also talked about reports of North Korean troops aiding Russia's war effort in Ukraine, saying it would, quote, mark a dangerous and highly concerning development if those reports are true. We begin with Campaign 2024 in Pennsylvania, where former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney joined Vice President Harris at a town hall in Chester.
I have said before, and it must be repeated each time, there are moments in the history of our country which challenge us, each of us, to really decide, do we stand for those things that we talk about, including a particular country over party. And you have been extraordinarily courageous in the way that you have done that, and I thank you for that. So, I have, in my career now, whether it was as the elected district attorney, elected attorney general, and then elected United States senator, and of course now vice president, I've counted that I have taken the oath of office 6 times. And for the elected leaders here, we know it is an oath that one must take sincerely and unequivocally, which is an oath, among other things, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and to understand what those principles represent and what they require of the individual who holds the office in the public trust. And let's not undervalue that point as well. It is not about the individual. It is not about what is in their personal interest. It is about what is for and in the spirit of the public good. And this is a moment in this election that presents a real contrast among how I, as one of the 2 nominees, and my opponent, the former president, think of that duty. And it is a duty, by the way. There are certain things in our lives that we have the choice if we feel like it. And then there are certain things that are just fundamentally a duty, like to raise our children, things of that nature. It is a duty to take seriously that oath and do it for the sake of the public good and in the public trust. And I think that this moment, with the choice that the American people have in this election in 2 weeks and 1 day, this election is presenting, for the first time probably in certainly recent history, a very clear choice and difference between the 2 nominees. And I think that is what, as much as anything, is bringing us as Americans together, who are understanding that we cannot, with such fundamental stakes being presented, afford to be mired in ideological differences without really staking our claim to the most fundamental ideals upon which our country stands.
Longtime Republican strategist Sarah Longwell moderated the event, and she asked the former 4-term Wyoming Congresswoman why she was choosing to get on the campaign trail with the vice president right now.
It's one thing for Republicans to sign a letter. We've seen that Vice President Harris has been endorsed by 200 Republicans in the national security space, all kinds of people from George W. Bush's administration. There's been a lot of people, they'll sign letters and maybe they'll go on TV, they'll release a statement. I was just with Republican Congressman Charlie Dent, former Republican congressman here from the state. He voted for you in his early voting. But you are out here campaigning. You are out here holding events. So talk about why it's been so important to you to be as involved as you are in getting Vice President Harris elected.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for the question, and it's an honor to be here today with you, Madam Vice President. You know, for me, every single thing in my experience and in my background has played a part in my decision to endorse Vice President Harris. And you know, that begins with the fact that I'm a conservative. And I know that the most conservative of all conservative principles is being faithful to the Constitution. And you have to choose in this race between someone who has been faithful to the Constitution, who will be faithful, and Donald Trump, who it's not just us predicting how he will act. We watched what he did after the last election. We watched what he did on January 6th. And so coming to this as someone who's been a lifelong Republican, a lifelong conservative, also as someone I spent time working overseas before I was elected to Congress, and I've spent time working in countries where people aren't free and where people are struggling for their freedom. And I know how quickly democracies can unravel. And I know that as Americans, we can become accustomed to thinking, well, we don't have to worry about that here. But I tell you, again, as someone who has seen firsthand how quickly it can happen, that is what's on the ballot. It's absolutely what's on the ballot. I also, I come to this decision as a mother. I have 5 children. And there was a moment right after January 6th when my husband and I were having dinner with our 2 youngest, our 2 sons. And I looked across the table at my young sons, and I thought to myself, you know, in the aftermath of the attack on the Capitol, are they going to grow up in a country where we don't have to worry about the peaceful transfer of power? Are they going to grow up in a country where that is guaranteed? And I believe that every one of us in this election has a duty and an obligation to do what we know is right for the country, and that's to support Vice President Harris. So I'm very honored to be here and to do that.
You know,
Today's event was the first of 3 the 2 made. They also appeared in Oakland County, Michigan. Tonight, they'll be in Waukesha County, Wisconsin. And Liz Cheney wasn't the only Republican speaking out for Kamala Harris today. Susan Ford Bales, the daughter of former Republican President Gerald Ford, said that she is endorsing the vice president, saying in a statement, quote, "When my father was sworn in as America's 38th president, the nation was in need of a serious, compassionate, and honorable leader who had the courage to do what was right and always to defend our Constitution. We face a similar dynamic today. America cannot regress back to a divisive paradigm of loathing toward one another and disdain for our Constitution. We witnessed on January 6th the horrors of what that looks like, and we can never allow a repeat of that tragedy." She goes on to say, quote, "Vice President Harris and I likely disagree on some policy matters, but her integrity and commitment to those same principles that guided Dad have led me to conclude that Kamala Harris should be elected the 47th president of the United States." Meanwhile, former President Trump was in Asheville, North Carolina, touring areas that are recovering from Hurricane Helene. And he said he supports Congress returning early from recess to pass more hurricane relief, and added that rebuilding the area is a priority for him.
Today I'm promising the people of this state that when I'm president, if I'm president, I feel better saying that because you never want to take something like that for granted. I feel actually a little bit better. They always say, "Oh, please, please, don't say that, sir. Say when." We have to vote, and they have to get out and vote. And we can't have 4 more years of what we've just had. That I can tell you. But I will support and totally complete the rebuilding of every region and town and city that was devastated by the hurricane, and I will slash through every bureaucratic barrier that you're having already and having problems with right now, I understand pretty badly, to help you get back on your feet. And I will personally recruit businesses from all over the world to help restore the prosperity to the region. They'll be moving in. They're going to be a lot of businesses are going to be moving back to our country through the proper use of taxation, incentives, and tariffs, one of the most beautiful words that nobody understands, or very few people understand. He understands it. But we're going to be using tariffs and good, proper taxation, and very importantly, incentives. And we're going to have a lot of people moving back to your state and this region, but your state. They're going to be very interested in North Carolina. We'll stop throwing our money overseas, and we're going to let our country benefit. We're going to put America first. It's time we put America first. We've been helping countries for 50 years. We've been helping them for 50 years, never stops. And when we need help from them, they're not there. So that's the way it is. But it's vital that we not let this hurricane that has taken so much also take your voice. You must get out and vote. The polls are open for early voting every day between now and November 2nd. And, you know, the thing that amazes me most is areas such as this and others where it's so hard to vote. People have lost their homes. They've sometimes lost members of their family. Do you know they've set a record in voting? Can you believe it? I mean, last year everything was beautiful, perfect, no problem. They beat last year. They beat every record, and presidential records too. Your voting records have all been beaten, and people, I don't know. I don't even know where they're living. Their house is gone, and they were standing in line ready to vote. So you have amazing people here, Michael. Really amazing. One of them is Michael Whatley. He was the head of your Republican Party. He was so good and did such a great job. We won the state twice, but he did such a great job. I said, that's the guy I want, because he was very much into stopping the steal. We don't want the steal. We want a fair election, an honest election. And you got it here. He actually hired 603 lawyers. Can you imagine that? And I said, who's that guy? That's the guy I want. And now he heads the whole party, the whole shebang. And now I can blame him if something happens. And I'll say, well, I made a mistake. I'll send him back. But I don't think that's going to happen based on what we're hearing from early returns, which are really phenomenal.
The former president also stopped in Greenville, North Carolina. He's already held one rally there. Tonight, Dr. Ben Carson, who served as HUD secretary in his administration, will join him at another event. And all this week on Washington Journal, we are focusing on how the campaign is playing out across battleground states. Our series started yesterday with a look at Michigan. And today we talked to Rahul Bali, political reporter at WABE in Atlanta, who explained why Georgia is a battleground in 2024.
It was the closest state 4 years ago, and a lot of the dynamics that you had 4 years ago are still here, whether it's demographics or the questions around both candidates voting for or against them.
Let's start with then that demographics. It was in 2020, if I got my numbers right, that Joe Biden barely won the state, 49.51% over former President Trump. So let's start with that. When it comes to those demographics, those numbers, what's changed? What stayed the same?
The starting point for me always is Georgia is a Republican state. That's always my starting point. But that there's always an opportunity and a path for Democrats to win in this state. So 2 years later, in 2022, you saw the governor of the state of Georgia, Brian Kemp, a Republican, win re-election, but you also saw Raphael Warnock, the Democratic U.S. Senator, also win re-election. But then up and down the ballot, statewide Republicans won, lieutenant governor, all the way down to other offices, and they held on to the state House and state Senate. So that's my starting point. Georgia's a Republican state, but the right circumstances, again, on the same year, you can see a Democrat win statewide as well. That's in those numbers, and those things have just not changed here in Georgia.
11 million or so people in the state. You say it's a Republican state. How does that break down, Republican, Democrat, or otherwise, or does the state chart it that way? Tell us.
So in the state of Georgia, we don't have voters register by party. We have about 7.1 million active voters in the state of Georgia. Look, again, you saw Governor Brian Kemp win his re-election, I think about 53%. But then you saw Raphael Warnock get to a runoff and then win in a runoff against Herschel Walker. the challenges there was some of the voters didn't come back and some of the voters were uncomfortable with Herschel Walker. So again, when we look at the state of Georgia, we don't have party registration. Again, the way I look at it is this is a Republican state, but that you can win if you find the right path.
So when you talk about those demographics, Mr. Bally, when you take a look at the state itself, what portions of the state would you look at saying, okay, what's the determining factor of who wins this year?
Look, we talk about, who is going to be the swing voters. Every voter in the state of Georgia is going to matter, whether in rural Georgia where you have a lot of Republican voters, but those smaller populations, and then you have the large Democratic center areas like Augusta, obviously Atlanta, Macon, and Savannah. So those are areas that are strong. And then you've got the northern suburbs of Atlanta that you're always watching for. While they lean Republican, they can also, vote Democratic. So my colleague Sam Greenglass, during the 2020 and 2022 election cycle, would talk to voters who voted for Governor Kemp and Senator Warnock. When I went to the farther outreaches, I would run into voters who just skipped the Republican ballot. They were, for example, uncomfortable with Herschel Walker as a Senate candidate. So you just see them skip that race. So those are kind of the scenarios. The scenarios are you may have some voters who show up who otherwise vote Republican, but then maybe skip the presidential race, vote for another candidate. Oh, they will vote for Donald Trump. That's what you're watching for, is what are those small shifts? And let me give you one interesting point. I've talked in the past 2 weeks, I've talked to 2 Republican candidates who tell me that in their internal polling, they are running just ahead of former President Trump. Again, that could be the margin here in the state of Georgia.
The other margin, and you've probably seen the headline as much as a lot of people about the early voting, over 1 million coming in so far. What does that number mean to you? To break that down for us.
So we actually had Saturday and Sunday voting as well. As of now, we're at 1.4 million voters have already cast a ballot. As I mentioned, we have 7.1 million active voters. That's almost 20% have already cast their ballot, and we still have 2 more weeks to go of in-person early voting and absentee voting. A couple of the numbers that have jumped out at me: the vast majority of counties have hit 20%. There were a couple of Democratic areas that jumped out at me: Augusta, Savannah, and Macon. These are Democratic areas. Their numbers are in that 14, 15, 16% range, so a little behind the rest of the state. So a couple of Democratic counties with not as high numbers. But the other number that jumped out at me, some of the analysis, 55% of those voters are women. So, you'll have some people say, look, we're doing great in Republican counties, and you'll have some Democrats point out that women are voting in bigger numbers than men, and that may portend something for Vice President Harris.
WABE Atlanta political reporter Rahul Bali on this morning's Washington Journal. You can see the whole segment at cspan.org and on the C-SPAN Now mobile video app. Our Battlegrounds series continues tomorrow. We'll look at Arizona. On Wednesday, it's Wisconsin. Thursday, Nevada, Pennsylvania on Friday, and then North Carolina on Saturday. And the Democratic governors of 3 of those states are making a push to defend what's called the Blue Wall. Governors Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan, and Tony Evers of Wisconsin are in the middle of a 6-day bus tour talking to voters. President Biden won all 3 of their states in 2020. And yesterday, they talked to ABC News about what they're seeing and hearing.
You took Beaver County, which is Trump country. Mm-hmm. You took it in 2022. You're working hard to get Beaver County. We were out there just a few weeks ago. It is definitely Trump country.
The good people of Beaver County are common sense. They're thoughtful. They want to know what these candidates are going to do to improve their lives. They saw Donald Trump in charge for 4 years, and he didn't make the situation in Beaver County better. In fact, he brought more chaos. The good folks out there are really discerning. They're careful. And I believe that Kamala Harris is going to perform really well there.
And Governor Whitmer, look at the polls. I mean, just a couple of elections ago, this blue wall was almost guaranteed for Democrats. I know you've seen enthusiasm. I know you're working hard, but the polls really aren't showing it. Who How did the Democrats lose over these years?
I think if you even go back 8 years, all 3 of our states went for Donald Trump. And then all 3 of us were elected and reelected. And this is, I think, you don't win a state like Michigan by 11 points without a lot of people coming over, independents and Republicans. And that's part of our missive as we've been to Wisconsin and Michigan and now here in Pennsylvania. There's a seat at the table for everyone. We understand that there are Republicans out there who are lamenting that Donald Trump is their nominee. They're not sure about our agenda. We're making a seat at the table for them. We are not writing anyone off.
I want to go back to the It is razor thin. And some of the averages, they see Trump actually making a gain. I know you're saying you have faith in these voters and they understand what they saw in Donald Trump years ago, but the polls just aren't showing it.
Listen, the only people that are not surprised about these polls are us 3. We all expect this. We are not upset about it. We're not scared. We're determined to make sure we do everything in our power to win this thing. And while this is going to be close, I'd much rather be playing our hand than theirs. We got a better candidate. We've got receipts on the issues that matter to the American people, on the economy, individual rights, affordable housing, et cetera. And we got a better ground game, and we're gonna do the work.
Governor Evers, it is hard to believe that people are still undecided at this point. They know who Donald Trump is. They know what he has done. They saw the Biden administration, and many of them are not happy with it and tie Kamala Harris in there. So is this an election where it's not so much in this ground game going after the undecided, but the unenthused?
I do believe it's undecided. I mean, I think there's plenty of enthusiasm on both sides of Wisconsin. You know, it's close. I won by 1%, and I tripled it the next time, 3%. And so we anticipated this right from the get-go, but I talk to people just about every day that are torn about what to do, how they're going to vote. And so yeah, I think there are people that can be convinced.
What are they waiting to hear? I mean, they have watched Donald Trump. They have watched Kamala Harris over these past few months.
Right.
How can they be undecided?
There are people that, frankly, don't follow this on a daily basis. There's people that don't follow the polls. There's people that just don't, you know, they go to work, they got kids at home, they do their job with their kids, they get up the next day. These polls look at a small number. I know it's a science, but at the end of the day, I run into people all the time that just haven't given it a thought. And so we're going to help them.
Democratic Governors Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan, and Tony Evers of Wisconsin talking to ABC News' Martha Raddatz. And reaction continues from President Trump's comments from last week, calling his political opponents, quote, the enemy from within. Here's how Speaker Mike Johnson on CNN yesterday.
In multiple interviews this week, Donald Trump repeatedly referred to prominent Democrats and others on the left in the United States, American citizens, as, quote, the enemy from within, unquote. And he suggested as president he would want to use the National Guard or military against them. Let me play some of that for our viewers.
The bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military, because they can't let that happen.
One of the first things you did when you joined Congress was to create the Honor and Civility Caucus. Does wanting to use the military against political opponents, would that pass muster with the Civility Caucus?
That's not... Jake, you know that's not what he's talking about there. What he's talking about is marauding gangs of dangerous, violent people who are destroying public property
he talked about Adam
and
Schiff
threatening
and the
other American citizens.
He's not talking. I mean, Governor Youngkin tried this with me too. That's not, he was very clear. Let me play, because he was asked about this later on, because Fox always likes to give Donald Trump an opportunity to clean it up, and he always says, no, I said what I meant. Here's what he said when asked about it the next day.
It is the enemy from within, and they're very dangerous. They're Marxists and communists and fascists, and they're sick. I use a guy like Adam Schiff because they made up the Russia hoax. It took 2 years to solve the problem. Absolutely nothing was done wrong, et cetera, et cetera. They're dangerous for our country. We have China, we have Russia, we have all these countries. If you have a smart president, they can all be handled. the more difficult are, you know, the Pelosi's, these people, they're so sick and they're so evil.
That's what he's talking about, using the U.S. military against, not marauding gangs of Venezuelan.
Wait a minute.
Adam
Hold on.
Schiff, Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul. So let me just say, if a Democratic presidential candidate said that you and your wife were evil and that the military should be used against you, I would say that's disgusting.
Well, thank you. And some have said that about us because they don't like my politics. I did not hear President Trump in that clip say he's going to sic the military on Adam Schiff. That's not what he's saying. You got two different clips in two different contexts. What President Trump is talking about is that they have been attacking and maligning him from the day he came down that golden escalator. Everybody knows that's true. In 2015, 2016, that's when this began. He's been the most attacked, maligned political figure in U.S. history.
And earlier today, Fox News anchor Bill Hemmer pressed Donald Trump's running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, about the comments.
He keeps coming back. He's asked about these enemies within comments. And I've read all of it. I've listened to all of it. It's hard for me to know what he really means about it. But that's not my question. My question is, why is it necessary?
Well, Bill, first of all, Donald Trump is unfiltered. I think this is one of the reasons why the campaign has gone well, is because he's not doing a basement campaign strategy. He's not just running on slogans. When people ask him questions, he speaks from the heart. And sometimes that means he's going to talk about issues that the mainstream media isn't focused on. But I think Americans are asking themselves, when we had these terrible riots in the summer of 2020, 20 people died, $13 billion in property damage, why wasn't law enforcement empowered to put down these riots, to reimpose law and order on American cities? That's, to me, what President Trump is talking about here, is that when you have local officials, when you have local rioters burning down American cities, when you have folks like Tim Walz encouraging rioters to go after local police stations, you need to have a federal response that reimposes law and order in this country. That's how I understand his comments is, look, we've obviously got some very important enemies to focus on overseas, but if people are burning down our cities, then of course we have to have a police response to that very basic violation of our right of public security.
He mentioned Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi by name in this case over the weekend.
Yeah, Bill, well, look, I mean, you have Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi who have been really part of weaponizing the Department of Justice against our country. I think what Donald Trump is saying is, look, we are the strongest country in the world. We've got the best people in the world, but we do have some broken leadership. We have people like Nancy Pelosi who's getting rich off of insider stock trades, even as our own country has gotten poorer, who's obsessed, Nancy Pelosi is obsessed with Donald Trump, not with reimposing policies that are going to deliver peace and prosperity for the American people. And of course, like I said, we do have people on the left, not most people to be clear, but some people on the left who are encouraging violent responses to what we believe is going to be a Donald Trump victory in a couple of weeks. That's not okay. And I think it's totally reasonable for the president to point out that, yes, we've got the strongest country in the world, but we do have some broken leaders in Washington. It's why we're running this race.
Republican Vice Presidential nominee Senator J.D. Vance on Fox News. You can find all of our campaign coverage at cspan.org and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. The House task force investigating the attempted assassinations of former President Trump released its preliminary report today. The New York Times said in reporting on it that the bipartisan panel, quote, chastises the Secret Service for poor planning and a communications breakdown that resulted in a fatal shooting at Mr. Trump's rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. The 53-page report says, quote, put simply, the evidence obtained by the task force to date shows the tragic and shocking events of July 13th were preventable and should not have happened. It goes on to say that the Secret Service, quote, did not effectively verify responsibilities were understood and being executed, and that law enforcement missed pivotal moments to engage gunman Thomas Matthew Crooks. The task force will release its final report by mid-December. You're listening to Washington Today.
With one of the tightest races for control of Congress in modern political history, stay ahead with C-SPAN's comprehensive coverage of key state debates. This fall, C-SPAN brings you access to the nation's top House, Senate, and governor debates from across the country. Debates from races that are shaping your state's future and the balance of power in Washington. Follow our campaign 2024 coverage from local to national debates anytime, online at cspan.org/campaign. And be sure to watch Tuesday, November 5th, for live, real-time election night results. C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of politics. Powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today. A new Washington Post poll released today shows Vice President Harris holding slim leads over former President Trump in 4 critical battleground states. The vice president leads in Georgia, 51 to 47%, 50 to 47% in Wisconsin, 50 to 48 in Michigan, and 49 to 47 in Pennsylvania. Polling in this year's campaign was the subject of an event hosted by the Economic Club of Washington today. Here's Amy Walter, editor-in-chief of the nonpartisan Cook Political Report, talking to Economic Club President David Rubenstein about how her organization handles polling.
Explain how, if you have 1,500 people that you poll, which is, let's say, a nationwide poll, why is that enough to represent 330 million people? How can 1,500 people represent 330 million?
That's an excellent question. Thankfully, I don't have to do that. I'm not an actual pollster, and I was not always great at math. But here's what I do know, is that you have to weight these polls, and this is going to be really the key question as we're coming into election night, why I think nobody feels comfortable for a couple of reasons. One, to Ben's point, everybody felt really comfortable in 2016 and 2020 and learned that lesson, so nobody's feeling comfortable now. I think pollsters are also, there's not a pollster out there who feels completely confident that the data that they have in front of them is how it's going to actually turn out. And so what you're doing is we have 2 things happening at the same time. We have a polarized and calcified electorate, more so than we've ever had. So people committed to their vote, regardless of what happens.
Okay.
And then a sliver of people who are deciding this election and trying to figure out who that sliver is almost impossible, and polling can't pick that up.
The event also featured perspective from Semaphore News co-founder Ben Smith, New York Times chief White House correspondent Peter Baker, and CNN anchor and chief national affairs analyst Casey Hunt. You can see all of it at cspan.org. The Biden administration has released a proposed federal rule that would give women with private insurance full coverage for over-the-counter birth control pills and other contraceptives. Reuters reports today that the rule, quote, expands a federal mandate requiring health insurers to cover preventative care services at no cost to patients under the Affordable Care Act. And the Washington Post reports that under the plan, quote, insurers would have to cover all approved drugs unless they have a therapeutic equivalent that is covered, which would lead to more brands of birth control pills and a wider selection of IUDs being available for free. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre was asked about it at today's White House briefing.
I wanted to ask about the contraception rule that the administration is putting out today. As you mentioned at the top, the president is proposing a rule that would require insurers to cover the cost of over-the-counter contraception. The Congressional Review Act allows lawmakers to overturn federal regulations that are implemented in the final stages of a presidential term. And I'm wondering if the White House believes that this type of rule could withstand that threat, or if you think that anything that happens in these last few months is potentially subject to congressional reversal.
So look, that's getting into a hypothetical that I'm just not going to do from here. Look, it's going through a rulemaking process, as you know, from the moment that the president made this announcement. It's now in a rulemaking process. We'll hear back from the public. We feel pretty confident this is going to move forward. And the reason why, as I stated at the top, why we're doing this is because of the Dobbs decision. It's because now we have women out there who don't have the protections that they need on their own health care because Roe v. Wade, which was law of the land for almost, our constitutional right for almost 50 years, were stripped away. And we have made that commitment from this administration, the Biden-Harris administration, to protect women, to do everything that we can. Now we're expanding ACA. Now we're providing this potential opportunity to give the women opportunity to make those difficult decisions and to have also the availability, obviously, of contraception. And so that is our commitment that we have made here. I can't get into what Congress is going to do, the hypotheticals from here. What we can focus on is keeping that commitment that we have made to women and families across the country.
The White House says the new rule would expand access for 52 million women, and as we heard from the press secretary, the proposal is now undergoing a 60-day comment period. White House National Security spokesman John Kirby said President Biden is deeply concerned about the leak of highly classified U.S. intelligence on an Israeli plan to attack Iran. He talked about it in a conference call with reporters.
We're not exactly sure how these documents found their way into the public domain. I know the Department of Defense is investigating this, and I'm sure that as they work through that, they'll try to determine the manner in which they did become public. So I'm just not able to answer your question whether it was a leak or a hack at this point. We'll let the investigation pursue its logical course there. We're deeply concerned, and the president remains deeply concerned about any leakage of classified information into the public domain. That is not supposed to happen, and it's unacceptable when it does. So he's deeply concerned about that, and you can rest assured that he will be actively monitoring the progress of the investigative effort to figure out how this happened. And obviously, he'll be very interested in hearing any mitigation measures and recommendations that come as a result of the investigative efforts and how to prevent it from happening again.
Is it clear at this point, do you guys believe that, or have any reason to believe that more documents could be forthcoming showing sensitive intelligence?
As we speak today, Amr, the answer to that question is no. We don't have any indication at this point that there's an expectation that there'll be additional documents like this finding their way into the public domain. But, and the but here is important, we're obviously keenly focused on what happened here, learning how it happened, and preventing it from happening again. And in the course of that work, that investigative work, we're certainly going to keep our antenna up and our eyes open for any potential future disclosures. But let me just come back to where I started before. At this time, there's no indication that we have a reason to suspect additional documents of this sort finding its way into the public domain.
CNN.com writing today, quote, the documents dated October 15th and 16th began circulating online Friday after being posted on Telegram by an account called Middle East Spectator. They are labeled top secret and have markings that indicate they are meant to be seen only by the U.S. and its so-called Five Eyes allies. That's Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. And Reuters writing today that, quote, officials in Ukraine and South Korea have accused North Korea of dispatching troops estimated to number in the thousands, perhaps, to aid Russia in its war in Ukraine. Reuters goes on to say that both Russian and North Korean officials deny the claims and that the U.S. officials say they are investigating the reports. Meanwhile, the Associated Press is previewing this week's meeting between the leaders of the so-called BRICS countries, saying, quote, the alliance, which aims to counterbalance the Western-led order, initially included Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, but started to rapidly expand this year. Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia joined in January. Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Malaysia formally applied to be, and a number of other countries expressed a desire to be members. John Kirby was asked about both.
So what response should we expect from the U.S. and allies amid these reports that Russia has North Korean soldiers working with them in Ukraine? Could this prompt either a surge in military assistance or an easing of the restrictions on Ukrainian use of long-range weapons? And then relatedly, as you know, Vladimir Putin is hosting the BRICS summit this week. BRICS has not had a shortage of membership requests in recent years. What does this mean to you about whether trying to, make Russia a pariah, has that worked? Is that stance effective anymore? And what message is this sending to China that seems to think it can do whatever they want and not face any consequences?
Who can do whatever they want and not face consequences? You cut out there.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was asking what message this sends to China that it could continue to, act however it wants, but not face any consequences or lose any friends, more accurately?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, I'll work backward here. I don't think the PRC has ever gotten that message. I mean, we've been none too shy about making our concerns known to the PRC with respect to the fact that Chinese companies have provided components and elements to Russian weapon systems in the defense industrial base, and we've sanctioned them. We have had very frank conversations with Chinese leaders, including Jake with his counterpart, the president and President Xi, about even that level of support to the Russian military. So I think our message to the PRC has been clear and consistent and remains so. On the BRICS, I don't think that you should look at this BRICS conference as some sort of coming out party for Mr. Putin and for Russia. First of all, the BRICS as an organization isn't new. And we've long said, these countries, every country gets to make sovereign decisions about who they associate with and in what format. And, we don't view the BRICS arrangement as some sort of, threat. These countries can decide for themselves who they want to associate with, and especially how they want to be economically linked with one another. Russia is increasingly isolated on the world stage. There's no question about that. Mr. Putin is still having to take radical steps to prop up his currency and to keep his war economy going. And he continues to have to take drastic steps to try to keep an army in the field and to try to achieve even a modicum of success on the battlefield.
White House National Security Spokesman John Kirby. A reminder, you can find all of our coverage, including our Campaign 2024 coverage, at cspan.org and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. That's also where you can find this program as a podcast. It's also on YouTube. Just search Washington Today. And for more on the stories that are shaping Washington every day, get our daily email word for word. Just go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.
WCSP-FM, Washington.
Catch C-SPAN's Washington Journal Campaign 2024 Battleground State Series live all this week. Join us for an in-depth look at 7 critical battleground states: Michigan, Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. Political experts will break down the races where Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump are vying for votes in contests that could shape the presidential election. Watch Washington Journal's Battleground State Series live at 8 a.m. Eastern all week on C-SPAN.